A quiet Georgia evening. An older black man pulled over for driving too slow at least. That's the excuse the cop gives. But what begins as a routine stop turns into a dangerous power play until the officer opens the wrong briefcase. What he finds inside doesn't just end his shift. It threatens to end his entire career. This isn't just a story about one man's rights. It's about exposing an entire system. Buckle up, because what happens next is bigger than either of them, and no one, not even the officer, sees it coming. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you're tuning in. We always love hearing from you. The rain had started as a soft whisper on the windshield, the kind that made the world feel quieter, like it was pausing to take a breath. Anthony Williams adjusted his wipers to the lowest setting as he eased his Lincoln down the winding road leading out of Monroe, Georgia. It was just past 7:00 p.m., and the sky had settled into a heavy gray, the sun long hidden behind thick clouds. The trees lining the roadside were starting to give up their last autumn leaves, red, gold, and rust, fluttering down like tired confessions. He exhaled, long and slow. The day had been exhausting, though in a different way than the long days he used to spend at the Department of Justice. Back then, he was running covert investigations, testifying before federal judges, reviewing footage until his eyes blurred. Now, semi-retired, he spent his time helping smaller law firms and nonprofit organizations dig into discrimination cases no one else wanted to touch. He didn't miss the politics, but sometimes he missed the certainty of knowing who the bad guys were and what he had to do to stop them. Today's meeting had been with a young black couple whose home had been targeted by the local HOA. What began as a dispute over mailbox paint had escalated into fines, threats, and eventually a lien on the property. It was a story he'd heard a dozen times, maybe more, but it never got easier to listen to. Still, he'd taken the case, just like he always did, and now he was heading home, tired, hungry, and ready for nothing more than a hot cup of peppermint tea and his jazz record spinning on low. His briefcase sat in the back seat, heavy with files and a sealed report, one he hadn't planned on needing tonight. But life had a way of throwing in the unexpected. That's why he never traveled without it. The road curved left. He turned on his signal early, cautious out of habit. A few cars passed, going the opposite direction, their headlights smearing streaks of white across the wet asphalt. The local gas station came into view, its yellow neon buzzing half-heartedly in the mist. That's when Anthony noticed it. Red and blue lights flashing in his rearview mirror. He let out a breath, not angry, not surprised, just tired. "Here we go," he muttered, pulling over to the narrow shoulder. He shifted into park and rolled down his window halfway, keeping both hands on the steering wheel. The way he'd done for decades now, trained by experience, not fear. It was a ritual he knew too well. The cruiser stopped behind him. The flashing lights bathed the inside of his car in alternating pulses of red and blue, turning his tan coat violet, then scarlet. In the side mirror, he saw the silhouette of the officer exit the car. Tall, broad, purposeful steps. Anthony didn't reach for anything. He waited. The officer approached quickly, shining a flashlight through the window before Anthony could even offer a greeting. "License and registration," the man barked. No introduction, no explanation, just tone. Anthony gave a small nod. "Of course, officer. May I reach into my jacket for my wallet?" There was a pause, then a clipped, "Yeah." He moved slowly, deliberately, handed over his license, then reached into the center console for his registration. The officer snatched them from his hand. "You live around here?" "Nearby," Anthony said evenly. "Just leaving a client meeting." The officer sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "You were driving slow." Anthony gave the smallest hint of a smile. That tends to happen in the rain. The officer didn't smile back. His eyes scanned the interior of the car, then flicked to the back seat where the briefcase sat. "What's in the bag?" he asked, voice tinged with suspicion. "Work documents," Anthony said. "Private files." Something shifted in the officer's posture, a flicker of interest. Or maybe something else. A spark of assumption. Anthony had seen that look before. The man stood still for a second longer, then stepped back from the window. "Sit tight," he said. Anthony looked ahead through the rain-speckled windshield, the faint outline of trees blurring like watercolor. He didn't know exactly what was coming next, but he knew the rhythm. And he knew something in the air had changed. The rain continued its quiet percussion against the roof, steady and calm, a sharp contrast to what was about to begin. Anthony kept his eyes forward, both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Through the mirror, he saw the officer standing at the cruiser for an unusually long time, doing something on his dashboard computer, though Anthony doubted it was just a routine check. Something in the man's posture suggested impatience, like he was looking for a reason to escalate. Eventually, the officer returned, boots splashing through shallow puddles along the edge of the shoulder. He didn't approach as quickly this time. He came slowly, but with the swagger of someone who felt he had the upper hand. Anthony studied him more closely as he approached early 40s maybe. Short buzz cut, square jaw, wearing mirrored sunglasses, even in the rain. His uniform was pristine, almost too perfect, like he had something to prove. The badge read BM Maddox. "You Anthony Williams?" the officer asked again, though he had the ID in his hand. "Yes, sir," Anthony replied, voice even. "What brings you through this part of town, Mr. Williams?" Maddox asked, his tone sharp around the edges, like a blade wrapped in small talk. "I'm a legal consultant. Had a meeting just down in Monroe." Maddox tilted his head slightly. "Legal consultant. For who?" "I'm under client confidentiality," Anthony replied. "But I help review civil rights cases." That seemed to hit a nerve. Maddox narrowed his eyes and gave a sarcastic snort. "Of course you do." He stepped back slightly and gave the car another once-over. His gaze landed on the briefcase again. Anthony felt it something shifting. The man wasn't just suspicious. He was irritated. Challenged, somehow. "You sure you weren't lost?" Maddox pressed. "Folks don't usually take this road unless they're cutting through somewhere they shouldn't be." "I've lived in Georgia longer than you've probably had that badge," Anthony said politely, not flinching. "I know these roads just fine." Maddox didn't like that answer. He moved closer to the window, now invading Anthony's personal space. The flashlight beamed directly into Anthony's face. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Anthony blinked once, then twice, calm but firm. "I do mind, officer, and unless you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause, I don't believe I'm required to exit my vehicle." Maddox gave a slow grin, one that didn't touch his eyes. "We got ourselves a lawyer in the house, huh?" "I'm not a lawyer," Anthony replied. "Just a man who knows his rights." That was the moment the shift became obvious. Maddox stood up straighter, his hand resting on his belt, not quite on his gun, but close enough for the message to be clear. "You acting real nervous, Mr. Williams," Maddox said. Anthony didn't move. "I'm acting calm. You're interpreting that however you want." Maddox stepped back and walked around to the passenger side, shining his light inside. He cupped his hands around the window and peered in. "What's in the bag?" he asked again, louder this time. "I already told you. Work documents. Mind if I take a look?" "I do." Maddox walked back to the driver's side and leaned into the window, this time lowering his voice. "See, you're making things real difficult for yourself. A simple stop. A few questions. Most folks just cooperate. But you're hiding something." Anthony met his gaze without blinking. "I'm protecting something." That seemed to genuinely rattle Maddox. His jaw tightened, and he stepped back, nodding to himself as if building up justification in his own mind. Anthony could feel the direction this was heading. He had seen this dance before, too many times. The difference was this time he wasn't just a random man on the road. "I need you to step out of the vehicle," Maddox repeated, now with a command in his tone. "On what grounds?" Maddox didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the door handle. Anthony immediately locked the doors. "Sir, I'm recording this interaction. This vehicle is equipped with a live stream dashcam. If you attempt to open my door without cause, That is a Fourth Amendment violation. Maddox's nostrils flared. You refusing to comply with a lawful order? I'm refusing to submit to an unlawful search. There was a pause, tense, electric. Rain tapped against the windshield like a ticking clock. Maddox stepped away and reached for his radio. He didn't speak into it yet, just pressed the button, held it, then released it again. Anthony knew the move. A threat, a bluff, or maybe a call for backup. It was always hard to tell. But Anthony also knew something Maddox didn't. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Maddox turned back to the window, a tight smile curling on his lips. You can play lawyer all you want. You're still a guy in a car on a lonely road. And I'm the law out here. Anthony raised an eyebrow. That may be, but the law has rules, and you're breaking most of them. Maddox didn't like that. Not one bit. He tapped on the glass again, more forcefully this time. I'll ask you one more time. Step out, or I open the door myself. Anthony didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked the man dead in the eye. And the rain kept falling, steady and cold. Something was about to snap, and both men could feel it. Anthony didn't move an inch. He had learned long ago that silence, used right, was just as powerful as words. Maddox stood there, hands still on the door handle, his face tightening with frustration. The officer was caught in a moment, somewhere between flexing his authority and realizing he'd already gone too far. The rain picked up slightly, turning into a gentle patter that smacked against the roof and windows. The rhythmic sound filled the air between them. Then, just like that, Maddox yanked the door open. Anthony didn't resist, but he did speak. You just violated federal law. Maddox didn't answer. He gestured sharply. Out. Anthony unbuckled his seatbelt slowly and stepped out of the vehicle. He was calm, composed his body upright, his eyes sharp. Maddox expected defiance or panic, but there was only measured presence. That unsettled him even more. Turn around, hands on the car. Anthony gave a faint chuckle. Seriously? Do it, Anthony complied, placing his palms flat on the wet surface of the Lincoln's hood. Rain beaded on his coat. Maddox quickly patted him down, nothing in his pockets but a wallet and a folded pocket square. No weapons, Maddox muttered. You look clean, but that briefcase. He moved to the back door and reached inside. Anthony turned his head slightly. Officer Maddox, you're making a mistake. You keep saying that, Maddox replied, tugging the briefcase out of the seat. But the only mistake I see is you thinking you're smarter than me. He carried the briefcase back toward the trunk area, flipping the latch. It didn't open. There was a combination lock. Maddox tapped it with a finger. Open it. No. The rain made a hollow ping on the car as silence returned. Maddox stood there, blinking, processing the refusal. You will open it. That's privileged property, protected under federal privacy statutes, Anthony said calmly. Unless you have a warrant, touching it is unlawful. You're treading on a civil rights lawsuit that'll be the headline of your department's next budget hearing. Maddox smirked, but it was forced. You think I'm afraid of paperwork? No, Anthony said. But you should be afraid of what's in that case. That gave Maddox just enough pause to second-guess himself, but not enough to stop. He looked down at the lock and, without another word, reached into his pocket for a collapsible baton. With a sharp snap, the metal extended. Anthony shook his head. You're going to force it open? I sure am. With one swing, Maddox struck the lock. It clanged hard but didn't break. He tried again, harder this time. A dent appeared. After a third hit, the lock finally gave way, popping open with a sharp snap that echoed in the stillness. Maddox pulled back the latches and flipped the case open. What he saw inside made him freeze. At first, it didn't register. He was expecting drugs, maybe cash, or stolen IDs. Instead, the interior was neatly organized. Legal folders, a hardbound report with the Department of Justice seal, and a USB drive clipped into a leather slot. He picked up the report. His own name was printed on the cover, confidential DOJ internal audit, Officer Brent Maddox. His throat went dry. Anthony leaned against the car casually, his voice calm as ever. That's your file. An internal review launched in 2022. You remember the Smithfield case? The one that mysteriously disappeared from your department's records. We didn't forget. Maddox stared at the report, not turning a single page, his face drained of color. Go ahead, Anthony said. Read the first page. That's the affidavit from a woman you threatened with jail time for recording you roughing up her son. She was a nurse. Your captain had the report buried. We found it anyway. Maddox's hands were trembling now. He didn't open the report. Instead, he looked back at Anthony, confusion warring with anger. What is this? It's your history. The parts that Internal Affairs pretended didn't exist. But I kept a copy. All of it. That USB contains video, audio, time-stamped radio chatter. Everything. I don't understand. Why would you have this? I told you, Anthony said. I consult. But more than that, I investigate. You're not the only one under review in this county. But you made it easy. Maddox backed away slightly, as if the briefcase were radioactive. This is entrapment. Anthony chuckled, shaking his head. No, officer. You weren't baited. You were documented. You approached me without cause. You opened my property against my explicit refusal. You've just proven everything that reports said about your conduct. For a moment, Maddox said nothing. His chest rose and fell with shallow, nervous breaths. Anthony took a step forward, not aggressive, just steady. You ever wonder why you keep getting transferred but never promoted? Why half your complaints disappear, but the brass never trust you with real authority? It's because they know you're a liability. They just don't want to deal with the scandal. Why are you carrying this? Maddox asked, voice hoarse. Anthony stared at him. Because you weren't going to stop until you humiliated the wrong man. I gave you every chance to back off. But you didn't want compliance, you wanted domination. Lightning flashed far off in the sky. The thunder rolled a few seconds later, slow and distant. Maddox stepped back again, one hand still holding the open case, the other curled into a fist. Anthony watched him closely. You have two choices, Officer Maddox. One, you try to cover this up. You lie in your report, claim I was aggressive, maybe toss the file in the nearest creek. But I already uploaded the footage to a secure drive. And that USB? There are 3 more copies in 3 different hands. He let the weight of that sink in before continuing. Or 2, you sit down, think real hard about the people above you who've been pulling strings, and consider helping me bring them down. Because this, Anthony nodded at the briefcase, isn't just about you. You're part of a bigger pattern. And the DOJ is ready to follow it to the end. Rain dripped from the edge of Maddox's uniform cap. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. And, for the first time since he'd pulled Anthony over, the swagger in his shoulders deflated. Anthony looked up at the trees bending in the wind and took a slow breath. It had begun. Maddox stood frozen, as if his muscles had seized up and his thoughts scattered in every direction. He stared down at the report in his hands, like it might detonate. Rain slid down the plastic sheet protectors, softening the typed letters that bore his name at the top of every page. Brent Maddox. There was no denying it, no imagining it was someone else's file. He flipped open the first page, his fingers hesitant. There it was, the DOJ letterhead, bold and unmistakable. Below it, a brief summary of disciplinary concerns, including excessive force complaints, racial profiling patterns, and 3 separate incidents involving fabricated justifications for searches. Dates, locations, and witness statements were listed in clear professional language. Maddox's lips moved silently as he skimmed the first few lines. When he reached the second page, his brows furrowed. There was a name he recognized: Tracy Gilmore. A nurse. He remembered her. She had filmed him dragging her 17-year-old son out of a parked car in a Walmart parking lot. The kid was doing nothing. Maddox claimed the car was suspicious. The report stated that he had demanded she delete the footage, and when she refused, he threatened her with arrest for obstruction. She filed a complaint. Somehow it never made it up the chain, or so he thought. Anthony was watching him closely from the side of the car, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He hadn't moved since Maddox opened the case. His calm presence now filled the space between them like a spotlight, one that burned without heat, illuminating everything Maddox had tried to keep in the dark. "How?" Maddox asked, voice hoarse. "How do you even have this?" Anthony stepped forward, speaking evenly. "I've spent years tracking how small-town corruption gets buried. Most of it never makes national headlines. That's by design. But I have friends who didn't quit when I did. We collect what internal affairs misses or chooses to ignore." Maddox kept turning pages, disbelief slowly giving way to panic. Photographs, typed transcripts, email chains, redacted body cam footage summaries. This wasn't just a complaint file. It was a dossier. Someone had put real work into this, and someone else had hidden it. "There are reports in here I've never even seen," Maddox murmured. "You weren't supposed to," Anthony replied. "Because if you had, you might have realized your career was hanging by a thread 2 years ago. This," he pointed to the file, "isn't just about your misconduct. It's about your department's culture of cover-up." Maddox reached the section labeled Secondary. Involvement, Civilian Collaboration and HOA Interference. His eyes scanned faster now. Names started appearing that made his pulse race. Sandra Evans, Lieutenant Doyle, Mayor Coleman. "This is... how the hell this goes beyond me," he muttered. "That's the point," Anthony said. "You're not the only problem, but you were the easiest one to catch. You make noise. You get sloppy. The others? They hide behind you." Maddox dropped the pages back into the briefcase, stepping back like it might bite him. He wiped a hand down his face, the water on his skin, a mix of rain and sweat. "You could have just filed this," he said. "Turned it in. Let them deal with it. And watch them bury it again?" Anthony shook his head. "I've done that before. The paper trail disappears. Evidence gets lost. Witnesses suddenly back out. No, this time I needed someone to act on instinct." "Someone like you," Maddox blinked, realization dawning. "You set me up. I gave you the chance to make a better choice," Anthony said softly. "But you didn't. You proved everything in that report on camera. In real time." Maddox started pacing in the narrow space beside the road. His boots crunched on gravel. His mind was spiraling, reaching for some angle, some defense. But every exit had already been sealed. "You recorded the whole thing?" he asked. "From the moment your lights flashed behind me. And it's online already?" "2 cloud backups," Anthony said. "Plus a live stream. This isn't just about you pulling me over. This is about what you did when you thought no one would see." Maddox stopped walking. He stared at the car, then at Anthony. His face was flushed, lips pressed into a thin line. But under the mask of authority, there was fear. Not the kind that made a man run, but the kind that made him reconsider everything. "Why me?" he asked again, voice quieter now. "Why target me?" Anthony's expression softened, but only a little. "Because you were easy to predict. You've been pulled off 4 complaint reviews in the past year. You escalated a stop involving a pregnant woman with expired tags. You ran an illegal search at a youth basketball fundraiser. Every time you were protected, but your patterns were obvious. I knew if I drove through this town long enough, you'd make the same mistake." Maddox opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The anger was still there, but it was dulled, now blunted by the undeniable truth staring back at him. Anthony walked toward him slowly, not threatening, just purposeful. When he stood a few feet away, he said, "You can keep pretending this is about me embarrassing you. Or you can recognize the truth. They used you as a shield. And now, that shield is cracked." "What do you want from me?" Maddox asked. "I want you to think real hard about your next move," Anthony said. "Because right now, you're at a crossroads. If you walk away from this and pretend it never happened, That footage will make its way to every civil rights organization in this state by morning. But if you help me, really help me, you might just salvage what's left of your name." Maddox stared at him, his mind a storm of doubt, guilt, and survival. The cold air around them was thick with tension. Even the rain had softened, falling in gentler patterns, like the sky itself was waiting. "What are you even trying to do?" Maddox finally asked. Anthony looked him square in the eye. "I'm trying to stop this town from rotting any further, and I need someone from the inside who's got everything to lose and just enough left to gain." For a long time, Maddox said nothing. Then he looked down at the briefcase again, the soggy edges of the report still trembling in his hand. "I need time." "You've got 24 hours, Anthony said. "After that, I go wide." Maddox nodded faintly, shoulders slumped. He turned and walked slowly back toward his cruiser, the briefcase still in his hands. Anthony stood beside the Lincoln, rain trickling down his face, his coat soaked, but his resolve dry as stone. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited, because the real game had just begun. The cruiser sat still behind Anthony's Lincoln, its emergency lights long since turned off, leaving only the occasional glint of headlights from passing cars to disturb the shadows around them. Maddox hadn't driven away. Not yet. He remained in the front seat, the briefcase resting on his passenger side, unmoving, like it weighed more than it should. His silhouette was stiff through the window, both hands gripping the steering wheel as if he was afraid to let go. Anthony watched from a distance, leaning casually against the side of his car, the storm easing into a steady drizzle. He didn't expect Maddox to bolt. Not now. The man had passed the point of escape. He was in a different kind of prison, now the kind made of consequences and exposure. Eventually, Maddox stepped out again, his hat now in his hand. His hair was matted, soaked from earlier. The rain didn't bother him anymore. He walked slowly toward Anthony, eyes cast downward until they met halfway. "You weren't bluffing, were you?" Maddox asked, his voice hollow. "No," Anthony said plainly. "I don't carry that kind of file unless I know what I'm doing." Maddox gave a small, bitter chuckle. "I thought you were just another mouthy old man with a chip on his shoulder. I've pulled over hundreds of guys like you. Figured I'd scare you a little, toss the car, let you sweat it out." Anthony tilted his head. "But I didn't sweat." "No," Maddox admitted. "You didn't. And that's what got me." There was a long pause, the rain punctuating the silence. Then Maddox ran a hand through his wet hair and said, "This report, there's stuff in here I didn't even know they kept. Conversations I barely remember. And people He stopped himself, swallowing the end of that thought. Anthony spoke softly. "You hurt people, and they remembered. That's the difference." Maddox looked up, shame flickering across his face. It wasn't full remorse, not yet, but something was shifting. Some wall inside him had been cracked, maybe not broken, but weakened enough for doubt to seep in. "I know what I did," he muttered. "I mean, I didn't think I was dirty. Not like the movies. Not stuffing cash in lockers or planting drugs. But I started cutting corners, letting my gut lead, thinking I could tell who was a problem before they opened their mouth." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "And most of those problems looked like me." Maddox didn't deny it. "I don't know what's worse," he said. "That I did it, or that nobody ever told me to stop." Anthony's voice sharpened, though it remained steady. "They didn't stop you because you made their jobs easier. You were the hammer. They needed someone to keep pressure on certain people, in certain neighborhoods. But you were always expendable." Maddox nodded slowly, staring off toward the trees beyond the road. "Yeah, I can feel that now. The silence from the top when things get uncomfortable. The fake loyalty." "I worked internal investigations for decades," Anthony said. "Let me tell you a secret, officer. The system doesn't love you back, especially when you become a liability." Maddox exhaled deeply, then turned to look at him. "You think I can come back from this?" Anthony didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the briefcase, then back at Maddox. "That depends. Are you ready to stop protecting them? A flicker of confusion crossed Maddox's face. "Who? The people you know are part of the problem," Anthony said. "Your lieutenant, the HOA board president, that mayor who got elected with zero oversight and a long memory of favors. You're not the only one with skeletons." "I'm not sure they'll let me live if I talk," Maddox said. "It wasn't a joke. They won't have a choice if you talk loud enough," Anthony replied. "And I can help you do that." A crack of thunder echoed faintly in the distance. Maddox looked down at his hands. They were trembling. "I've got a daughter," he said quietly. 13. Bright. Funny. She already thinks I'm a hero." Anthony nodded, but his face didn't soften. "Then give her a reason to keep believing that after she learns the truth." For a moment, Maddox looked like he might collapse. His eyes welled, but he blinked it away. Then he reached into his cruiser and grabbed the briefcase again, holding it with both hands like it had become sacred. "You said you wanted me to help. What does that mean exactly?" Anthony took a breath, stepping in a little closer, his voice low. "It means telling the truth. In a deposition, in a hearing, in a recorded statement, it means giving me every scrap of evidence you know about every abuse, every backdoor deal, every order that didn't come from paperwork." Maddox gave a slow nod, his mouth pressed into a firm line. "And what do I get in return?" "A shot at redemption," Anthony said. "And maybe a future where your daughter doesn't have to be ashamed of your name." That landed harder than anything else had all night. They stood there a moment longer, the air heavy with something deeper than rain. Guilt, perhaps, or resolve. Maddox finally said, "I'll do it." Anthony gave a single nod. "Then we meet tomorrow, 10 a.m., downtown Atlanta. There's a safe office space in the basement of the McAllister building. You bring whatever files you can get without raising alarms. I'll bring backup." Maddox looked like he was about to ask who the backup was, but then stopped. Maybe he already knew. It didn't matter. The wheels had been set in motion. He opened the cruiser door and paused. "I never had someone talk to me like this." "Not without yelling." Anthony smiled faintly. "That's because I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to make sure this stops with you." Maddox climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove off slowly, headlights cutting a pale yellow path through the darkness. Anthony remained still for a while, rain clinging to his coat, the distant hum of retreating tires the only sound. Then, without a word, he climbed back into his Lincoln, checked the dashcam one last time, and pulled onto the road. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Anthony drove the rest of the way home in silence, his thoughts tangled between relief and calculation. He knew better than to trust a man like Brent Maddox, not completely, not yet. People in his position rarely broke clean from old habits. But there had been something in Maddox's eyes back there, a crack in the armor. Shame had a way of doing that to men who thought they were untouchable. When he got home, Anthony went through the usual motions: coat hung by the door, kettle set on the stove, shoes placed neatly by the mat. He poured a cup of peppermint tea and sat down at his desk, the glow of his computer screen filling the small study. A secure upload had already been in progress, backing up the dashcam footage to 3 encrypted drives, one local, one on a protected cloud server, and a third routed through an offshore data center in Iceland, just in case. He opened a fresh case file on Maddox, this one marked with a yellow tag, active asset, under evaluation. Anthony didn't use terms like friend or ally for people like him. Not yet, but if Maddox stuck to his word, he could be more useful than any report or recording. He could give names, dates, patterns, things the DOJ couldn't get with a subpoena, things that only someone on the inside, dirty as the floor of a county jail, could provide. The next morning came gray and slow, a fog clinging to the edges of downtown Atlanta like smoke. Anthony parked 2 blocks from the McAllister building and walked the rest of the way. The building was old, sturdy, a relic from the 1930s with deep red bricks and limestone columns that had stood through protests, court battles, and more backdoor deals than any citizen would want to know. He made his way to the basement office. entering through a service door with a keypad lock. Inside, the space was plain 2 desks, a conference table, a mounted television, and a handful of filing cabinets with reinforced locks. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. 10 o'clock came and went. Anthony checked his watch once, then twice. At 10:17, the buzzer rang. He opened the door to see Maddox, looking tired, eyes bloodshot but focused. He was dressed in plain clothes, a gray zip-up jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He carried a black duffel bag that sagged with weight. "You're late," Anthony said, stepping aside to let him in. "I drove around the block 5 times before I could talk myself into getting out of the car," Maddox admitted. "Still better than not showing up," Anthony said. "You bring what I asked?" Maddox dropped the duffel on the table and unzipped it. Inside were several manila folders, a slim black binder, and a small external hard drive wrapped in an old gym towel. Anthony approached carefully. "What am I looking at?" "Everything I could get my hands on without raising alarms," Maddox said. "Shift logs, disciplinary memos, body cam audit summaries, even HOA complaint correspondence. Sandra Evans, she's deeper in this than I thought." Anthony lifted one folder and opened it. Inside was a printout of an email exchange between Sandra and a city inspector. The language was coded, but clear, orders to red flag certain properties owned by Black and Latino families in the neighborhood, under the guise of zoning enforcement. He flipped through another folder. A list of HOA fines filed against homeowners with matching last names across several communities. An alarming number of them marked paid under protest. "Jesus," Anthony muttered. "This isn't just a couple of bad apples. This is policy," Maddox nodded. "They used me to enforce it. Pretended it was about neighborhood order, but it was always about control." Anthony took a deep breath and sat across from him. "You ready to make a statement?" Maddox hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, let's do it." Anthony hit a button on the table recorder. A soft red light glowed. "State your name and role for the record." "Brent Thomas Maddox, patrol officer with the Monroe County Police Department. Badge number 18,492. Suspended pending internal investigation." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "You've been suspended already?" Maddox nodded, words getting around. "Someone in records must have flagged the files I pulled. I got the call this morning. Administrative leave until further notice. That's how they do it, quietly, before I can talk." "Too late for quiet," Anthony said. "Go on," Maddox began. Slowly at first, like a man peeling off armor he'd worn too long. He described the enforcement quotas unofficial, but understood. The unspoken rules about who to watch, who to stop, who to let go. He explained how Sandra Evans used HOA complaints to trigger code violations, which Maddox and other officers were encouraged to act on aggressively. He described one case in detail, an elderly couple fined repeatedly for their lawn not being mowed to regulation height. When they couldn't pay, the HOA placed a lien on the property. The police were called when they resisted. Maddox had been the one to arrest the husband. "He was 82," Maddox said, his voice cracking. "He couldn't even walk without a cane. And I put cuffs on him like he was a threat, because someone told me he was non-compliant." Anthony listened, nodding slowly. He wasn't here to comfort. He was here to witness. After nearly 2 hours, the recording stopped. Maddox sat back, exhausted. So now what? Anthony stood and crossed to the file cabinet. He opened a drawer and removed a document, a typed DOJ intake form, already pre-filled with Maddox's name and badge number. "Now we make it official," Anthony said. "You're a cooperating witness in a federal investigation. And if they come after me?" "They will," Anthony said. "But not before the story gets out. And not before they know you're not standing alone anymore." Maddox looked down at the form, then back up at him. For the first time, he looked something close to hopeful. A man no longer holding secrets, but ready to let go of them. For the next few days, Anthony worked around the clock. He sifted through every document Maddox had delivered, cross-referencing names, dates, and complaints. The patterns were undeniable. He built a timeline, a paper trail, showing how code violations from the HOA aligned perfectly with selective enforcement by the local police. Nearly all of it targeted homeowners of color. The files exposed a collaboration between the HOA, the mayor's office, and several officers in the department. It was subtle, but consistent. The code language, the red flag phrases, the routine patrol stops on quiet streets with no reported crime. It was all designed to pressure residents into leaving their homes. When they couldn't be forced out, they were fined, harassed, and in some cases, arrested for non-compliance with manufactured violations. The deeper Anthony dug, the more disturbing the picture became. What had started as a single traffic stop now looked like systemic harassment cloaked in legal language. One name kept surfacing: Lieutenant Daniel Doyle. According to internal rosters, Doyle had been Maddox's immediate supervisor for 5 years. He signed off on every shift report Maddox submitted, approved every search report, even the questionable ones. His name was often copied on emails from Sandra Evans. One string of messages caught Anthony's eye, a conversation about cleaning up property values in specific problem zones. Doyle's reply read, "Handled. I'll send Maddox." It made Anthony's stomach turn. Late that night, he opened a secure video call with one of his former DOJ colleagues, a woman named Carla Riggins. She had been with Internal Affairs for nearly 2 decades and now worked with the Office of Inspector General. Anthony shared his screen and walked her through everything: Maddox's testimony, the documents, the HOA coordination, the body cam audit summaries, and the coded language embedded in HOA correspondence. Carla sat back when he finished, her face lit only by the blue glow of the monitor. "This is big," she said. "Not just illegal searches, we're looking at civil rights violations, racketeering, and possibly conspiracy to deprive citizens of property under color of law." Anthony nodded. "It's all there. I've got more coming." Maddox agreed to wear a wire if needed. Her eyes widened. "You trust him that much?" "I don't trust him," Anthony said, "but I trust what scares him." She nodded slowly. "Good. That fear's useful. And if he's suspended, he's probably already being watched." "I know." Anthony leaned closer to the camera. "We need protection for Maddox and for the witnesses we're about to interview. There's a couple in their 70s who were fined into near foreclosure. They've agreed to speak with us." "But they're terrified." "I'll fast-track a request through OIG," Carla said. "But I'm warning you, if this gets political, and it will, you'll be facing serious pushback." "You're not just poking the local police. You're exposing a network of coordinated abuse tied to property values and campaign donors." Anthony's voice dropped. "I'm well aware." The call ended around 2 a.m. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he met Maddox again, this time at a private parking garage near the courthouse. Maddox had shaved and was wearing a button-up shirt, still rough around the edges, but he looked more like a man trying to rebuild. "Did you read the names I sent you?" Anthony asked as Maddox handed over a second drive. "I did," Maddox said. "Doyle's going to be a problem. He's smart, keeps conversations off email, doesn't even text. Most of his orders are verbal, always suggestions." Anthony nodded. "But he's tied to too many approvals. If we follow the paper trail, we can corner him." "There's more," Maddox said. "You remember that report about the elderly couple with the lawn fines?" Anthony did. "The Jeffersons. I found something else. Old footage. Never filed in the official report. Body cam from one of my partners. Shows Doyle telling Sandra Evans to hold off on the lien. Said, 'Let them sweat a little longer,' like it was a game." Anthony's jaw clenched. "You have the footage?" "I do now." Anthony placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good work." Maddox looked surprised by the gesture. He didn't say anything, but the silence held something deeper and understanding. Maybe even a trace of respect. By the end of the week, Carla had arranged a meeting with a federal prosecutor. A small task force was being assembled to quietly begin interviews and prepare preliminary subpoenas. Nothing official yet, but the wheels had started turning. Anthony knew from experience that this was the most dangerous part, the silence before the storm. The time when people got nervous, started shredding papers, making midnight phone calls, or worse, turning violent. He'd seen it all before. He began notifying witnesses under pseudonyms, setting up secure calls, and documenting every interaction. He made 2 copies of everything, one for the task force, one for insurance. At the same time, Maddox remained cooperative. He gave names, addresses, old shift notes he wasn't supposed to keep, even recalled overhearing Doyle talk about selective sweeps that had never been recorded on the dispatch logs. One afternoon, Anthony and Maddox sat together reviewing the HOA board meeting notes obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. One line, buried in the minutes, jumped out at Anthony. Our enforcement partners have confirmed coverage through Q3. Officer BM will be on call for compliance checks. BM Brent Maddox. Maddox saw it and rubbed his face. They didn't even bother using a full name. No, Anthony said, because you were never a person to them, just a tool. Maddox nodded grimly. Not anymore. Anthony didn't say anything. He just highlighted the line and added it to the growing case binder. They were getting closer, closer to the storm. It was just after midnight when Maddox called. Anthony had been going over witness transcripts at his kitchen table, a half-drunk mug of coffee cooling beside a stack of printed documents. When he saw Maddox's name flash on the screen, he didn't hesitate to answer. "Talk to me," Anthony said. "They know," Maddox replied, his voice taut with anxiety. "Doyle knows I'm working with someone. I think Sandra does too. She stopped me outside the grocery store today, smiled like nothing was wrong, but then said, 'Careful who you trust these days, Brent. Some people record everything.'" Anthony leaned back in his chair, his mind already clicking through contingencies. "Did you respond?" I played dumb, said I didn't know what she was talking about. But her tone, it wasn't casual. It was a warning. There was a long pause on the line. "They're tightening the noose," Maddox continued. "I saw Doyle speaking with 2 officers I used to work with. One of them keeps circling my street in a cruiser. Not close enough to be obvious, but enough to send a message." Anthony sighed. "I told you it would come to this." "I didn't think it would happen this fast," Maddox said, lowering his voice. "I've got my daughter this weekend. I don't want her caught in the crossfire." Anthony nodded to himself. "Then it's time we move things forward." "What does that mean?" "It means I make the call," Anthony said. "We take this federal. No more slow steps. No more hoping the city looks the other way. You're going to testify, Brent, and you're going to do it on the record." Maddox went quiet. "You said you wanted to do the right thing," Anthony reminded him. "This is it." "I know," Maddox whispered. I didn't think I'd be scared like this. I've spent my whole career thinking I was the one people feared. Now I know how it feels." Anthony softened his tone, just a little. "You're still alive. That means you still have power." The next morning, Anthony arranged an in-person meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Landon, a seasoned federal prosecutor known for dismantling corruption rings across the Southeast. They met in a secure office on the 10th floor of the federal building downtown. Maddox arrived wearing a plain navy suit and a tie that looked barely used. He sat stiffly at the end of the long table while Rachel flipped through a summary folder Anthony had prepared. After 20 minutes, she closed the file, folded her hands, and looked directly at Maddox. "Officer Maddox, do you fully understand the consequences of what you're doing?" He nodded. "I do. You'll be labeled a traitor by your peers, possibly lose your pension, your protection, even your standing in the community. I know. You're ready to name names under oath?" "Yes." Rachel glanced at Anthony, then back to Maddox. "Then let's get started." For the next 2 hours, Maddox spoke this time with purpose. He laid out the full framework, how complaints were filtered, how Doyle coached officers to avoid writing detailed reports, how the HOA coordinated with police to selectively target undesirable homeowners. He described how promotions were used to reward silence, and how fines from HOA violations were funneled through shell management companies with ties to city officials. He didn't hold back. Rachel listened closely, asking precise, clipped questions to clarify timelines and verify terminology. She didn't offer comfort. That wasn't her role. Her job was to build a case, and Maddox had just handed her the cornerstone. When it ended, she stood and looked down at him. "We'll begin the process of preparing you for a grand jury appearance," she said. "Until then, you're under protective monitoring. Limited contact with anyone in law enforcement. If you feel watched, followed, or intimidated, you contact us immediately." Maddox exhaled slowly. "And my daughter? She'll be safe," Rachel assured him. "We'll make sure of it." When they left the building, Anthony placed a hand on Maddox's shoulder. "You did something most men wouldn't." Maddox gave a faint, tired smile. "I didn't do it for them. I did it for her. I know." They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city moving around them, cars honking, people on lunch breaks, a bus wheezing to a stop nearby. But for that moment, the noise didn't matter. They were moving into the final act now. Anthony could feel it. This wasn't just about one bad cop, or even one corrupt HOA. This was about a system that had thrived in darkness for too long. And now, someone had finally turned on the light. By the end of the week, the Department of Justice had greenlit a formal investigation. The internal designation was dry and bureaucratic, Operation Garden Gate, but Anthony knew the name would carry weight soon enough. It was the beginning of something larger than a lawsuit or a disciplinary hearing. It was a reckoning. He watched from the hallway as Maddox sat under harsh fluorescent lights in a secured conference room, flanked by federal agents and a DOJ liaison. The mood inside was tense but focused. The agents asked questions methodically, allowing Maddox to recount events in chronological order while a stenographer recorded every word. Maddox didn't flinch. Not this time. The shame that had once clouded his tone had been replaced by resolve. He wasn't testifying out of guilt anymore. He was testifying because he knew he was part of something bigger, and for once, he wanted to be on the right side of it. After nearly 4 hours, the door opened and Rachel Landon stepped into the hallway where Anthony waited. "He held up well," she said. "I told you he would." "He's not a hero," she added, more as a statement than a critique. "No," Anthony agreed, "but he doesn't need to be. He just needs to be honest." Rachel tucked the file under her arm. "We're ready to issue subpoenas, starting with Doyle and Sandra Evans." Anthony felt a weight lift from his chest. "What about the mayor? We'll need more to bring him in, but we're getting close." Later that evening, Anthony met with Carla Riggins again via secure call. She had reviewed the additional body cam footage Maddox provided, clips that had never been entered into any official evidence chain. One in particular showed Doyle giving direct orders to ignore a search warrant and proceed with an entry anyway, claiming verbal authorization. That footage, paired with HOA documentation showing coordinated efforts to pressure families into selling, painted a picture not just of abuse but of collusion. "This is RICO territory," Carla said bluntly. They weren't just bending the law. They were using public office to systematically strip people of their rights and their property. Anthony leaned forward. "How fast can we move? We'll need to act soon. The second they catch wind of what's coming, they'll start deleting everything." "You think they've been quiet so far?" "Wait until subpoenas hit inboxes. I've already prepped media contacts," Anthony said, "just in case someone tries to spin this into a rogue cop story." "Good," Carla nodded. "Because once this breaks, it's going national." 2 days later, Maddox met Anthony in a parking garage again, this time carrying a slim black laptop. "This is my last drop," he said. "It's Doyle's private files. He used to back up his phone to this old machine he kept at the precinct. Said he didn't trust cloud storage. I grabbed it during my last shift before suspension." Anthony opened it on the spot. Inside was gold. Text message threads with Sandra Evans, and even a city councilman, talking about keeping the right kind of families in the neighborhood and cleaning up violations before the elections. Some of the messages were barely coded. One read, "Got a call from the Board family at 1425, needs a visit." Maddox knows the drill. Maddox shook his head as he watched Anthony scroll. They thought they were invisible. They always do. By Friday, subpoenas were issued. The first went to Doyle, the second to Sandra Evans, the third, and perhaps most explosive, to Mayor Robert Coleman. When news broke the following Monday, it spread like wildfire. The local news led with headlines like, DOJ opens federal investigation into police HOA collusion in Monroe County. Former officer blows whistle on systemic discrimination and property seizures. By midweek, national outlets had picked up the story. Cable news debated it. Commentators shouted over each other about deep state conspiracies, local overreach, and quiet racism in suburban America. Anthony didn't care about the noise. He cared about the truth. With media pressure rising, DOJ moved quickly. A task force descended on Monroe County, interviewing residents, auditing old tickets and citations, and freezing several HOA bank accounts under suspicion of misuse and fraud. Anthony stood alongside Maddox as they watched a federal agent put a lock on the HOA's office door. "This is really happening," Maddox said, voice low. "You made it happen," Anthony replied. "I'm still not used to hearing that without sarcasm." Anthony chuckled. "You will..." As they left the scene, a woman in her 70s called out from across the street. "Are you the one who brought them?" she asked, eyes wide. Anthony turned. "Yes, ma'am." She walked closer, slow but steady, clutching a folder in her hand. "They fined me $2,100 over a bird bath in my front yard. Said it was an unauthorized structure. My husband had built it for our anniversary. After he passed, I refused to take it down." Anthony gently took the folder. "We'll get your money back." She nodded, tears brimming. "And my name? We'll clear that too." In that moment, Anthony saw it not just in her, but in the neighbors watching from porches and driveways. Fear was starting to fade. People were beginning to believe that maybe justice was possible. Later that night, Anthony sat in his office alone. The headlines had already shifted slightly. Now stories spoke of investigations expanding to surrounding counties. Whistleblowers from other police departments were reaching out, some anonymously, some with evidence. The momentum was growing. He opened the briefcase that had started it all. Inside, the original report on Maddox now had a note stapled to the top: cooperative witness, status, active. He placed it gently in the completed folder. The real work was just beginning. Anthony arrived at the courthouse before dawn. The streets were still quiet, washed in a faint orange glow from the street lamps. A cold breeze rolled through the empty plaza out front, ruffling the flag that hung above the steps. He took the stairs slowly, briefcase in hand, the same one that had set all of this in motion. Inside, the federal building hummed with anticipation. Reporters already lingered outside, setting up tripods and wiping dew-off lenses. The lobby echoed with the sounds of shuffling papers and sharp dress shoes. Court officers moved with purpose. It was going to be a long day. Maddox was already waiting in the holding room behind the courtroom. He looked different now, still visibly anxious, but no longer hollowed by fear. He wore a navy blue suit, not expensive, but pressed and clean. His hair was neatly trimmed, and his hands no longer trembled the way they used to. "You ready?" Anthony asked as he stepped inside. Maddox gave a slow nod. "As ready as I'll ever be. You tell the truth. That's all that matters. I've been running from it for so long. I forgot what it feels like to speak it." Anthony placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Today, you get to reclaim it." At precisely 9:00 a.m., the hearing began. Federal prosecutors laid out their case before the grand jury, presenting the evidence in a slow, deliberate rhythm: email chains, sworn affidavits, video recordings, body cam footage, and financial documents tracing HOA payments to shell companies connected to public officials. The room remained silent, except for the clicking of laptops and the occasional clearing of a throat. Then they called Brent Maddox to the stand. He swore in under oath, his voice steady. What followed was 3.5 hours of testimony, calm, candid, and damning. He spoke of conversations behind closed doors, of arrest quotas enforced under the guise of neighborhood safety. He described HOA board meetings that included directives to target certain properties usually owned by minorities, the elderly, or working-class families who didn't conform to the board's standards of aesthetics and compliance. He named names. He didn't flinch. At one point, the prosecutor played a short clip from a body cam video, a moment in which Doyle, unaware he was being recorded, made an offhand comment about removing eyesores from the neighborhood while standing in front of a perfectly maintained home with a Black Lives Matter sign in the yard. There were gasps in the gallery. Anthony watched the jurors carefully. They were listening not just politely but attentively, leaning forward, taking notes. When Maddox stepped down, there was no applause, no dramatic outburst, just quiet understanding. It was enough. In the days that followed, the fallout came fast and hard. Lieutenant Doyle was placed on immediate administrative leave. Within a week, he was arrested on charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and destruction of public records. Sandra Evans, the HOA president, was indicted on fraud and extortion counts specifically tied to illegal fines, forged complaints, and her financial links to zoning board contracts. The mayor, Robert Coleman, tried to deny everything at first, claimed he had no direct involvement, but emails recovered from the seized laptop suggested otherwise. He was implicated in a bribery scheme connected to fast-tracked zoning permits and financial kickbacks from compliant developers. Federal agents arrested him during a press conference. The images went viral. Suddenly, Monroe County was on the national stage not for its charm or quiet southern streets, but for a scandal that pulled back the curtain on a decades-old abuse of power. Other counties across the state began investigations into their own HOAs and police departments. Some cities launched independent audits. Anthony didn't smile at the headlines. Justice, when real, was never clean. But he felt it beneath the noise. Beneath the politics, something was shifting. 1 week after the indictments, Anthony returned to the neighborhood where it all began. The one where the Briefcase had first been opened. The street looked the same. Neat lawns, a row of mailboxes, trees beginning to bloom. But the air was different. People were outside, talking, waving, mowing their lawns without fear of being ticketed for the angle of their grass. He passed the home of the elderly couple, the Jeffersons, who had nearly lost their house over trumped-up HOA fines. Mr. Jefferson stood out front in overalls, sipping sweet tea from a mason jar. He raised his glass in greeting. "You did it, Mr. Williams," Anthony chuckled. "We did it." Mr. Jefferson walked over and handed him a small wooden carving, a bird, mid-flight. "My wife says thank you," he said. "We never thought anyone would care enough to fight for us. Not at our age." Anthony held the carving gently. "You deserved better. Now you've got it." That afternoon, he stopped by a local cafe. The same one Maddox had mentioned weeks ago, the place where Sandra Evans had given him that ominous warning. The waitress recognized him immediately. "You're the one from the news, aren't you?" "I suppose so." She poured his coffee and leaned in a little. "We've been waiting for someone to shine a light on all this. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one knew what to do about it." Anthony looked around. The walls were lined with bulletin boards and flyers, most of them, now advertising community meetings, support groups, and HOA reform events. Change, slow but real, was taking root. That evening, back in his home office, Anthony filed the final report. He titled it Briefcase Incident Resolution Summary. Inside, he included the timeline, key testimonies, evidence logs, court developments, and one personal note: systemic abuse thrives in silence. But when one voice speaks truth and another dares to listen, things begin to crack. And in those cracks, light gets in. He closed the file, backed it up, and placed a hard copy in a sealed envelope. He labeled it for archives. The briefcase now sat empty beside his desk, not because the work was done, but because this chapter was. The following weekend, Maddox stopped by unannounced. He wasn't wearing a badge anymore. No uniform. Just jeans, a flannel shirt, and tired eyes. "I took a job at the VA," he said, helping with vet outreach. Anthony raised an eyebrow. "You served?" "No. But I figured if I'm going to help people, I should start by listening to folks who've already given more than I ever did." Anthony nodded. "That's good work." Maddox hesitated. "I wanted to say thank you, not just for giving me a chance, but for holding me accountable." Anthony looked at him for a long moment. "That's the job, Brent, for all of us." They shook hands not as enemies, not even as allies, but as men who had walked through fire and come out changed. And outside, beneath a quiet sky and the rustle of early spring leaves, a new wind carried through Monroe County. Not the wind of fear, but the kind that carries truth, and the promise that even after years of injustice, healing could begin not with noise or vengeance, but with a man, a briefcase, and a choice to stand. The story of Anthony and Officer Maddox isn't just about exposing corruption. It's a powerful reminder that truth and justice have no expiration date, and courage can come later in life and still make all the difference. In a world where older adults are sometimes made to feel invisible or unheard, this story shows that our voices still matter. Anthony, though retired, didn't choose silence. He chose to stand up, take action, and become the catalyst for change. For anyone who's ever thought, "It's not my fight," or "It's too late to make a difference," this story proves otherwise. Change often starts with one quiet act, one firm stand, or even one briefcase filled with truth. And sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to begin so others can follow. You're never too old to do what's right. If this story inspired you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every click helps spread awareness, justice, and hope to more people.